Next on Garden Line, we'll learn how to apply a repellent for protection against mosquito-borne infections.
Leave at least 2 hours for this to dry.
Funding for Garden Line is provided in part by your membership in the Friends of South Dakota Public Broadcasting. And by Swiftel Communications.
Hello and welcome to Garden Line. I'm Tammy Watson. Tonight on Garden Line, we'll visit with an extension horticulturist who will explain how to divide and replant irises. And as always, our panel of lawn and garden experts is here to answer your questions, not my questions about fashion, as we were talking about right before the show started. These gentlemen have the most up-to-date information about gardening, lawn care, insects, trees, and all your other lawn and garden-related concerns. So get ready to call in. Our phone number for you to call is 1-866-595-SDSU. Again, that's 1-866-595-7378. Joining me in the studio tonight, ready to answer your questions, are John Kiekeffer, Brookings County Extension Educator, John Ball, Extension Forestry Specialist, Mike Mechnig, Extension Weed Specialist, and Casey Jensen, SDSU Natural Resource Management. Helping answer the phones tonight are members of the Coteau Master Gardeners, and remember, when you call in with your questions, please provide the Coteau Master Gardeners with as much information about your garden problem as possible. Be ready to provide a description of the problem, when it first appeared, whether it's affecting any surrounding plants, and let us know what the moisture and or soil conditions are that exist around it. Okay, so to start out, we'll go around our table. What is currently happening in the world of gardening that you want to point out to us? John Kiekeffer.
Well, mine tonight is going to be more of a general thing that happens, and it happens year-round. We end up seeing a number of ants, and we're at a time of year when we start getting ants in houses and get a lot of calls from people who find ants crawling on their kitchen counters, or they find those large black ants and start worrying about carpenter ants in a home. And so I'm going to talk just a little bit tonight about identifying some of those ants, figuring out what they are and how to handle them on there. And so when we look first of all at those small ants that you find in the kitchens, we have the tiny little ones that are almost too small to see. Those are grease ants, a lot of people call them, or thief ants. And those are some that are hard to trap. They're hard to bait, they're hard to keep out. They're small enough they can get in through almost any crack. And so really our best method of control on those guys is going to be trying to clean things up well enough that they don't have a source of food in the house to bring them in the first place. Those little bit larger ones that get in there, and like the sweets, some people call them sugar ants, some call them sweet ants. They go by a number of names, but they're a common species around here. And same thing there, it's going to be important to try to clean up anything they might eat. Those are easily attracted to some of those bait products out there. Good way to take care of them if they're in the house. Then we get into those larger ants. The real big black ones are the carpenter ants. You're going to look for signs of damage in the home, probably evidence of some moisture first. They like to follow moisture in. It's not a case where they cause primary damage a lot of times, but rather they like that rotting wood or that softened wood, and they move in and make a nest in there after that. And those are going to be some of those you're going to want to try to find that nest and treat it directly. And then the last group, and I've got some video here of some of these last ones that we see in the lawn. We've got some large ones. These often don't come into homes, but we end up finding them in our lawns. People hit the nests with a lawnmower and they want to know how to get rid of them. These are some of those ants that are really kind of a nice thing to have around if you can tolerate those mounds in the lawn. These are predatory ants. Like most ants, they like to eat other insects. They'll eat other animals as well. They do a great job of aerating the soil. They're far better than earthworms or most other insects at actually moving soil and putting those air pockets in it. They're just a beneficial insect if you can tolerate having them around. If you're going to try to get rid of these, we talked a few weeks back on this show about using a powder and raking that into a mound, and that works well for some of the smaller species. As you get into these larger ones that build larger mounds, you're probably going to want to use a liquid insecticide with a powerful spray behind it, something that has some force and works it down into that soil. And it's going to take repeated applications of that sort of thing to try to knock them out of there. But again, with any of these, if you can limit the chances of them coming into the house and just live with them, they're nice insects to have outside.
Okay, I can get a real quick follow-up question for you. With the thief ants, the little tiny grease ants, I read, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, that if you mix bait with like something greasy, is that a good way to get them to the bait?
That is actually a good way of doing it. And if you can buy just one of the straight insecticides and mix it, one of those that's labeled. We use a lot of boric acid is what goes into this, or borax that goes into those baits. If you can buy some of that and mix it with grease, or just even use the taro and mix it with a little melted butter or bacon grease, something like that, and put that out on a piece of tin foil, that'll usually get them.
Okay, thanks. All right, Mr. John Ball, what's our hot topic in gardening or in tree raising gardening?
Whatever. Well, as everyone's well aware, we've had a lot of flooding this last season, and we're all hoping that the floodwaters are going to begin receding here in the next couple of weeks. But with that, we're going to see a tremendous amount of damage on our trees. You know, most of the trees have actually been in water far longer than they should be. And while many of them still look fairly good, you can already see the telltale signs of the leaves turning yellow on that. So we had a meeting in Pierre a couple of weeks ago, and then tomorrow night we're going to be having a session down in Dakota Dunes area, and that at the North Sioux City at the Dakota Valley High School auditorium from 6:30 to 7:30. And during that time period, I'm going to give a short presentation as to what people might expect to see in their trees, what they may want to start doing once those waters start to recede, and more importantly, what sort of things they're going to see for the next couple of years, because unfortunately trees have a great ability to hold their breath, so to speak. And I know that in 2013 I'm going to be taking calls on why is my tree dying? It was because it was flooded back in 11.
I was just going to ask, so we're not going to know by August or September if that tree's going to make it. It's
No.
going to be another 3 years.
Right. Well, there's going to be ways of telling, but what I do want to let people know, there's some trees that this fall they may decide they want to get down just because their stability is gone, because the root system has been so damaged by the floodwaters. And in fact, we're already seeing some trees fall. And there's other trees, they may just want to decide that, you know what, why wait it out for another year or two? Let's replace it now.
Oh, that's absolutely no fun. That's a tough one.
No, it's going to be, it's not going to be a fun talk tomorrow night, but it'll be an informative talk.
Well, get a jump on that.
Yeah.
Okay, Mike Mechnig, what do you have for us tonight?
Well, I was out in the heat this weekend pulling the weeds out of my garden, and I started getting a little confused as I realized, you know, a lot of these weeds are probably just as tasty, if not tastier, than the plants that I planted in my garden. So I thought, well, let's talk about some of these weeds that you might be wanting to eat out there that are perfectly fine. Got some slides here, I think. Common purslane is that's just the scourge of the whole South Dakota gardening scene. You know,
It's
that's just,
taken off
oh,
right now.
everybody hates this one, but it is delicious. In fact, Henry David Thoreau sat down to a bowl of these and wondered how could there be so many hungry people in the world with such abundant food growing all around us. So common purslane, one you might want to check out, great with some Italian dressing. Or, moving along, we've got another weed here that you may want to add into the salad, yellow wood sorrel, a very tart taste. Does contain oxalic acid that can cause kidney stones, so don't eat too much of this, everything in moderation, but tasty and kind of tart, so not bad, yellow wood sorrel. And then we also have another kind of vegetable type thing next up, black nightshade in the tomato family. Those black berries are scary looking, but they are edible. But not the green ones. The green ones are toxic. So yeah, kind of the yin and the yang here type of thing. So watch out, only the purple ones, but I get people requesting this. Where can I buy the seed for black nightshade? So a tasty one that you may want to try in muffins or pancakes and so on. And the last one that we may not really think about, but is kind of I've been hearing a lot about this one this year, is stinging nettle. A lot of people talking about getting those young plants, you know, maybe 6-inch tall plants, and there's still some out there. They were in my garden stinging me while I was weeding. But you take those and you boil them up, and they can be boiled up kind of like spinach, and you can eat the leaves. So stinging nettle, certainly you want to wear gloves while you're harvesting that, but the boiling takes out that chemical that causes the itching.
I'm just despairing because this can all be found in my yard and garden.
Perfect. You're in luck. You're very
eat.
lucky. Consider yourself.
Stick with the
Consider
sweet
my-
corn. Oh yeah, eat this, but don't pick it too early; it'll kill you. Oh yeah, this will sting you. Oh yeah, this could oxalis. Yeah, goes kidney stones. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well,
You got to expand your horizons, and you got to take a risk.
Casey, can you top this? Okay, come on.
Well, I've been getting calls this week about snakes,
Okay,
and
this is a topper.
and so this is the time of the year when I generally get phone calls about snakes that are around people's homes, and what do they do, and how do I get rid of this, and it reminded me of the last week. John was talking about some of the insects around the homes, particularly the earwigs. And the best way to control snakes around your home is to kind of clean up the litter around the foundation. The snakes are coming in there for one of two things, mainly looking for food. And so if there's lots of litter and places for rodents or large insects to hide, that's where those garter snakes in particular are going to come in and come hunting. And if you have some old lumber laying around, they love to get under boards. And so the best management for snakes around your house is to clean up the litter and the mess. The litter, I mean by the dead vegetation and all of that kind of structure that provides habitat for snakes around your home.
Now, are you talking mostly garter snakes?
Most of the calls I get are for garter snakes, the plains garter snake or red-bellied garter snake in some cases. West River sometimes will get bull snakes or gopher snakes, and occasionally rattlesnakes, West River. But again, the management's the same. If you keep things picked up and clean, don't have brush piles, lumber piles, things like that provide cover for the snakes and cover for rodents, you're going to reduce the problem considerably.
Okay, and with the exception of rattlesnakes, do I need to worry about these?
There are the plains rattlesnake is the only venomous snake we have in the state. The others may bite, but there's no.
It's a great night.
Garter snakes. I mean, I've handled hundreds of them, and I've never been bitten. I have been defecated on, and I think I would rather be bitten.
Oh.
Because it really is quite foul.
The snake whisperer. That's a good name for you. Okay, we're going to dive into a question that, this was a letter that came in a while back, and I'm afraid it is a tomato plant question. My tomato plants have curly leaves, and I say that because we were talking tomato questions before the show. The foliage seems to be doing great, but the top leaves are curling and don't look like they're going to unfold to be normal. The tomatoes are in large pots, 5-gallon size, on the patio. They get sun a half to 3/4 of the day. Some blossom, some tomatoes, but not like what we had in the garden. I have 8 varieties. A couple have brown spots on the lower leaves. I'm assuming the answer is farmer's market. No. Are these gonna? What might this be? What are some options?
Boy, I don't know. With disease problems this year and that sort of thing on tomatoes.
Disease is running rampant. We did talk last week, I think it was last week, just a little bit about the size of the containers. And Dave Graper was mentioning that 5 gallons is about the minimum size that you would want. Larger than that would be better. And it's possible that there's just simply not enough room in there for them to really take off and do well.
When something gets accidentally hit by herbicide spray drift.
I've had some issues with that in my vegetable garden with drift from a neighbor that's spraying their corn, and so it comes over and it's exactly what I see is the leaves will curl. on my tomato
And
plants.
tomatoes are kind of the canary
Yep.
in the mine, and that if there's any herbicide drift, it seems to be tomatoes pick it up sooner
But
than
we'd
anything.
have to see pictures or a plant
Right.
sample
Right.
because with the dry conditions we've been having, I mean,
But it
some
seems-
people have been having lately.
Yeah,
that
and
certainly
if
could
it's
do.
only the tomatoes in the bucket that are curling and not the tomatoes in the garden, then I wouldn't think it would be herbicide. It would probably be something else.
We'd need to know how close those are. If the bucket is right next to the garden, then chances of it being herbicide are pretty low. If they're quite a ways, it might go up.
Pictures would help on that one.
Okay. They have another question, and I don't know if it's related or not. Their peppers, again in pots, they don't think they even had blossoms. They're 18 inches tall, and they look healthy, but it doesn't appear like they set for fruit. So what are some reasons why a plant wouldn't blossom? Just the same types of stress that you're talking about?
Or just not to that maturity stage yet.
Okay.
Need a little time.
That would be my guess, yeah. Just not quite ready to bloom yet.
I've seen that with peppers at our place. They're just slow this year.
Yeah. We had enough cool weather early in the season. It kind of limited that growth early in the year, and they're just a little bit behind yet. They're playing catch up.
Okay. All right. I think this question is going to head towards Mr. John Ball. What can I do to eliminate the cotton from a cottonwood tree besides cutting down the tree?
Cutting down the tree. I know, that's the answer they don't want to hear. Now, there's a couple products out on the market, Florel, fruit eliminator being one of them, and if you spray them, it will reduce, not eliminate, seed production. And they do have cottonwood listed as one of the species at which you can apply it. We used to use it on crab apples, for example, reduce crabapple production and a number of others. However, having used these sort of products in the past, timing is essential. You know, they'll tell you X number of days from bloom or some other event. And they're not kidding. That means that day. I don't care what you're doing. That day you apply it. You have a very narrow window. So, and with a cottonwood, such a big tree, that's going to take one heck of a sprayer and the amount of product up there. So really, in this case, there's only two solutions. One is love the cotton or kill the tree.
Okay. We'll go from there. A question about raspberries or about a bug that sucks from the fruit and it dries up. What can be used as a spray? And they're from south of Kadoka.
Sucking out the raspberries. You know, we'll get nitidulas, picnic beetles.
Inside the beetle.
Inside the
berries,
fruit.
yep.
If the fruit just stays on just a little too long, you got to pick it dead ripe, but if it starts to get a little older, and the unfortunate thing there is that you can't really spray for them then because you don't have a long enough window. You're spraying fruit that should have been harvested, essentially.
Right. Yeah, and that could be one of them. The other possibility is that as that fruit is first starting to form, they had some leafhoppers or spittle bugs or plant bugs move through and try to feed on those and actually do a little damage on there. And it might look like they sucked the juices out of the end of that fruit, and really what happened was that saliva caused some damage early on in the formation of that, and it just didn't form properly then.
And the other possibility, and I've seen this with our year being as wet as it is, I've seen some pretty bad cane blight and anthracnose on raspberries, and you'll get fruit that'll be misshapen and small. And I could see someone might thinking that an insect sucked it out. If they haven't seen the insect, and the nitidulas are the ones you see, little picnic beetles in there.
Or taste.
Yeah, or taste. They are a little crunchy. Many parts are edible, but kidney stone problems. It's a side effect. But they won't defecate on you. So. But, you know, we've got unfortunately, this has not been a good year for raspberries, and so they may be looking at a disease problem rather than insect.
It has been a good year for picnic beetles. They're all over the place right now, so watch the centers of those raspberries if you're eating them.
But if you pick them right, that's the problem. If you let them go, you know, you don't go 4 or 5 days without picking them, they'll be filled with it. But pick them on time, and you're usually safe on that.
Okay. Well, we will move on. A question from Del Rapids. Gopher mounds, how do we get rid of them, i.e. the mounds and or the gophers? They haven't tried anything yet.
I'm assuming they're talking about pocket gophers. That's generally the ones that are making the mounds, and in fact, it's the only true gopher we have. Everything else that people call gophers are actually ground squirrels.
Okay, so which flicker tails? Which ones are those?
Those are ground squirrels.
Okay.
Okay, but the only gopher we have are the pocket gophers, and they push up dirt from underneath as they're cleaning their burrows out. Best way I know is to trap them, and you have to actually dig the hole, remove the soil that they've mounded up, and usually it'll be in almost a heart shape, and where it comes together, if you go straight down from that point, is where the hole will be, and usually there'll be 2 tunnels that go off from that point. And if you get down, clean that out, and you can use, I use standard leg hold traps, and then put a board over the hole so it stays dark. And then usually very quickly you'll catch the culprit.
I don't like this. Catching the varmints and cutting down the trees.
There's a more fun way of doing this.
Oh no!
Not everybody knows.
Do share.
There is a product on the market called the Gofinator. Or
They're actually, I know of 3 different ones.
Yeah.
And they come with varying levels of quality on the blast shields.
Yeah.
Okay, what is this?
They pump propane into the tunnels, and then there's an igniter, and you blow them up. And usually that's used in agricultural situations where
Be careful around houses.
you wouldn't want to do it around home.
So they actually explode, and this is a humane.
Well,
humane is a leg trap.
There's a researcher down at the University of Nebraska that's been involved in excavating some of these afterwards to see how many of them die and things like that. And they found that they actually they get enough inside of them that it's instantaneous.
The concussion is pretty significant.
It gets into the lungs, and there's not.
But
much
in a normal homeowner's, in a farmstead or suburban neighborhood, trapping is your best bet.
Because the neighbors will think you're crazy.
Well, and one gopher can push up several mounds, and just taking care of that one usually will take care of the problem. Now, the good side of this, my mother for years has used that soil as potting soil.
Oh, it's great soil.
Because they push up this soil that's really fine, and she loves it. She'll go out, or she used to send us out to collect it and use it for potting soil.
Yeah, put it in a wheelbarrow, put it in your garden. I mean, they actually turn up some pretty nice soil.
Yeah.
And it comes from deep enough that there aren't very many viable weed seeds in there. So if you put it in
the
pots,
propane blast will kill most
sterilizes the soil.
Is the Gofinator legal in South Dakota?
Yes, it is. In fact, we have
Only
commercial.
on gophers.
Only on gophers.
In other states, they use them on woodchucks as well.
Yeah.
So they do work on other burrowing creatures, but you have to be really careful around foundations.
I mean,
with them.
they're really built for agricultural situations, pastures and things like that, where you're away from buildings.
They truly do come with blast shields, and you are expected to get behind
big
them
boom.
because it throws rocks out of the ground and everything else.
Or quite.
It's a bad day for critters. How can I control rabbits? They're eating everything, flowers, vegetation, shrubs. Are there some plants they don't like? And that's from T.
I don't know anything rabbits won't eat. And the best way I know is to fence them out. Usually even a short chicken wire fence around your garden will keep them out. They could hop over it, but they won't, because usually there's easier pickings somewhere else. If you're out in the country like I am, there are lethal methods that you can use. You can trap them, you can shoot them. There are live traps you can use to remove them from your garden and remove them somewhere else. But a simple fence is probably the best.
And there's nothing that is really a plant deterrent that they'll at least leave alone?
Not that I'm aware of. It may be some of the thorny things, but I've even seen them eat greenbrier in the south. And I don't think
stinging nettle, but maybe they cook it and boil it. Now on those live traps, I hate those things because they're kind of like puppies if you live in the country. People are always dropping things off. Yeah. And from what I've been told, really, it's not that humane to trap rabbits and turn them loose somewhere else because the trapped ones don't survive anyway.
They're probably going to die anyway because they're unfamiliar with the habitat and they get predated. So you're probably going to feed an owl or a coyote or something.
Okay. I'm going to change topics again. This just isn't any fun. Okay, trees. We have tree pictures. I have a 17-year-old white seedless ash that is losing leaves like it's fall. There are no really signs on the leaves. The trunk is the same as it has always been. Is the drastic change from so much rain to no rain some of the problem, or should I give it some nutrients? This is a Sioux Falls picture, a 17-year-old white seedless ash.
Well, you know, on white seedless, well, on all the ash this year, we've seen a real problem with ash rust, though that doesn't appear to be the problem here, because if it was ash rust, you would see these really bright orange spots all over the leaves. But what we've also seen is that we've actually had two problems. It's been too wet and been too hot. And I've seen a number of areas where the soils have been saturated so long, the trees are already dropping their leaves. You know, we talk about flooding, but your ground doesn't have to be flooded. It can just be saturated. And there's enough areas, Sioux Falls, heavy soils, been continually wet, that I've seen trees dropping their leaves prematurely. Likewise, under fairly high temperatures, they're transpiring at a very high rate, and sometimes that'll cause leaves to fall as well. So it's just been a very tough year for trees. The only thing I would tell them not to do is don't fertilize. Fertilizer is not chicken soup. It's not going to bring this tree back. They're better just waiting it out. There's not much they can do.
Wait until the fall to fertilize? Just don't fertilize?
Don't fertilize.
Okay.
I mean, the only reason you really need to fertilize a tree is if there's an element that's missing. In other words, you've done a soil test. And in South Dakota, our soils tend to have adequate amounts of phosphorus, potassium. They sometimes lack iron, but that's due to the unavailability from the high pH, so adding iron isn't going to help. You can add nitrogen, but most of the trees are adapted to a low nitrogen diet. I mean, if you say, I'm trying to grow the biggest tree in the world, yeah, go ahead and hit it with nitrogen. But otherwise, you know, save your time and money.
Okay. We got another picture here and more bugs. This is a question from Spearfish. I found a couple of brown spiders with red legs, and their abdomens had white top markings and horns on the rear. The bodies were about the size of a nickel, and with legs, this one was larger than a quarter. That's big enough. They were on the summit of Little Devil's Tower, about a mile from the summit of Harney Peak in Custer State Park. 7 a.m. late July. They were making a light web trap on the top. They were not afraid of me. I almost felt challenged. Wonder what they could be. So somebody wants to know.
Well, these are, first of all, I should say this is a great picture of these. Nice and clear, and it really a nice photo of this spider. This is one of our orb web spiders. This is actually the marbled orb spider. Araneus marmorius is the species on it. These are large spiders. They're not uncommon in South Dakota. Live throughout a lot of the United States. And as far as being not likely to be intimidated by you, it probably simply didn't know you were there. These things have very poor eyesight. They sense their prey by the vibrations on those webs. And those webs are something that they're going to end up spinning every day. They eat their own web to reclaim those nutrients in the web, and they spin a new one because otherwise those sticky threads on there get coated with dust and they don't catch anything. So by spinning a new one every day, they've got a nice fresh trap out there. So probably something like that you observed. And as far as not being intimidated, just not enough eyesight to even recognize you being there.
You know, he's right though, because about a week ago I was on top of Little Devil's Tower, just checking our bug traps and that, and walked up the top, take a look at the view. And I ran into 3 families, asked me the same thing about the spider. You know, they thought the spiders were coming after them, and they wondered if they would sting them and would it kill them. And I said, no, you'd have to be much smaller to be stung. But I was amazed at the number up there on that big rock. But you're right. I mean, all you do is, if you want to have fun with them, is touch the web, and they'll react to that. But otherwise,
yeah, they can bite like most spiders, but it's not going to do much to a normal person. And I think you'd have to work at it to actually make them bite you.
You have to provoke them, huh?
Right. They're not really going to come running at you in this case.
I'd like to hear that. Okay, we've got another picture, but first we had a viewer comment from Garrettson back to regarding the nightshade plants. They make a delicious pie when they're ripe. use a recipe like you would for blueberries. Do you feel vindicated there?
Yeah, there you go. We at our booth at the State Fair, you get people all the time asking about where they can get them and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, a lot of people miss those blueberry or those black nightshade muffins. So,
When right.
when right.
When right.
That's right.
Take that. Okay, another question. This one's from Pierre. We are trying to identify this species of bird. A pair of them have nested and had chicks in a birdhouse on our deck in Pierre. Whenever someone gets close to the deck, the birds scold us in a chittering sound, much like a squirrel. We're not particularly asking that our question be asked on TV. Well, too late. They just want to know what it is. They've never seen it before.
These are our house sparrows, maybe the most common bird in North America, I would guess. These are not natives. They were introduced into New York in the mid-1800s by an English aristocrat who was trying to recreate the gardens of Shakespeare in New York, and so he brought in this house sparrow, or some people call them the English sparrow, the starling.
The starlings, I've heard that about them.
They've spread from there, and the really interesting thing about this bird is that it has evolved in such close association with people that it does not exist away from human habitations. It is completely dependent. It's kind of like the Norway rat of the bird world. I mean, they're so tightly associated with people that if there's no human habitation around, they're not there.
Now, in the sparrows around our place, there's different markings and different coloration. Yes. Are they different kinds? Or are they just
there's roughly 40 different sparrow species in North America. This isn't even really it's not in the same family as our native sparrows. It's actually a weaver finch from Europe, Africa, that whole family of birds. So it's not actually really a, quote, sparrow.
Okay, but our wisdom, that's what we call them.
Yeah, and they love to take over martin houses. They'll build in an old swallow nest. They'll build on the tracks of the barn doors. And they have this really kind of messy nest. They just grab everything they can, and it's this big ball of dry vegetation. And so if you want to get rid of them, you just have to be persistent and keep taking the nesting material out.
Okay.
There's no protection for these birds legally in North America.
They're not songbirds.
No, they're pest species.
Okay. Back to it. Boy, it's just a brutal night for the critters on Garden Line. Well, up next, we're going to visit the home of, that's a segue for you. We're going to visit the home of Extension horticulture specialist Rhoda Burrows. She's going to demonstrate what to do when irises become overcrowded and when the rhizomes need to be divided and moved to a new planting location.
Good evening. We're going to move some iris tonight, and I'll show you how to dig them out, split them up, and move them to the new location. We have some here that have gotten pretty crowded, and they're in a location where I don't really want them, so we're going to move them to the new location. A good time to do this is from mid-July to about the end of August, so this is an ideal time to do this. So we just go ahead and shovel right next down to them. All the rhizomes are pretty close to the surface here, so we don't have to go too deep. I'm going to cut through. Sometimes you'll have to cut right through with the shovel, but I can see the rhizome there and the roots coming out. And this one's breaking apart, but that's fine. This is a good size to move. We'll get a couple more here so you can kind of take a look at it. There's another one. This also gives you a chance to clean out any grass that might have moved into your bed. You can see these are healthy white rhizomes. not any rot on them. When you do this, you want to look at the rhizomes and make sure that they're healthy, and any parts that are starting to turn dark brown or soft, you want to get rid of those. We'll clean these off and put them in our new bed. Okay, we've got our rhizome cleaned off here. Just took a hose to it. And I want to show you this little guy here. He's a little baby that's just getting started. I don't want to take him off separately. I want to keep him connected to the larger rhizome there to feed him. So I'm just going to leave him. And then I'm going to cut back the foliage to about 2/3, or about 8 inches long. And we'll do that on all of them, and I'll just leave the little guy. He needs all the help he can get. Okay, and that's ready to stick in the ground then. Now when we plant this, we want them on a slight rise so that they have plenty of drainage. We don't want them setting down too far. And we just barely, we can dig these roots in so they can reach down, but the rhizome itself should be just right at ground level, just barely covered. And there we are. It's happy in its new home, and you don't really want to give it very much fertilizer. They don't take a lot of fertilizer. So this should be ready to go.
And okay, we're getting back to the questions here, and I believe we've got a tree question, and you know, it's Garden Line. We have the experts here on set, and the tree question is, on the bottom 1/3 of a blue spruce, north side needles toward the trunk are turning brown, starts at the trunk, but eventually reaches the tip of the branch. They're dying from the inside out is what it seems like. Can anything be done? This is from Menno.
Nope.
Is it really dying from the inside?
I mean, to describe the problem very well, and what it most likely is, and again, I'm diagnosing without a picture, but from a description, is called Cytospora canker, and it's a
How do you spell that?
Cytospora.
Okay.
All right, and that disease is very common on blue spruce. It usually affects trees after about 15 or 20 years, just when they start getting the size you like. Earlier in some of when you start getting West River. But the lower branches will begin to die, and they described it right. The needles from the inside out begin to die, and the branches from the bottom up begin to die. And if they go in and look at those branches that are dying, they'll notice what may appear to be bird droppings almost on the branches, and those are actually resin blisters. The only thing you can do is prune out the branches as they die. There is no chemical, there is no treatment that's going to cure it. That's one reason why a lot of us refer to blue spruce as 20 years and out. They do not age gracefully.
You're not a fan of blue spruce in South Dakota.
You know what? I like blue spruce because I'm going to get hate mail tomorrow. Why don't you like blue spruce? I like blue spruce for 20 years, all right? But after that, I don't. They don't age gracefully.
So is hygiene trying to prune out the unhealthy stuff any way to get ahead of this, or?
It'll slow it down, but unfortunately, there's no way you can absolutely stop it. But you can slow it. But, you know, people like to have those lower branches there because that's providing the protection for them, and now they're actually having to prune those out. So it's a nice tree. Now, admittedly, I've seen blue spruce that are 50 years old in perfect condition. But for many of them, after about 20 years, they do begin to age.
Okay. All right, we've got a couple more pictures here we're going to take a look at, and this is from Creighton. Can you tell me what this plant is? I got it from my aunt. She brought it from Minnesota. My friend also got one. She pulled it out. She thinks it looks like a noxious weed. I don't want to grow it if it is. And then there's a second part to this question. We'll get to that. But the first one is, what is that, a plant or a weed? The decision is on you, gentlemen.
Oh, okay. Well, it's hard to say. And in the second picture, this one more close up, the leaves are kind of messing me up a little bit, but the flower makes it look like small flower Gallensolga. is the name of this. Small flower Galensoga. Yeah, it came from further east, I think they said, and that's kind of true. It's kind of one of those weeds that's moving from east to west. So it might be a little bit more common on the eastern side of South Dakota. I think this is kind of also nicknamed as like a quick weed or something like that because it can sometimes do 2 life cycles in a year, you know, so it can grow, produce seed, and then those plants can grow again and produce seed and all in 1 year. So, I mean, that is a horrible characteristic for a weed to have, you know, that it can multiply all in the same year. So not a good one. It's not a noxious weed, but it's certainly an obnoxious weed. So yeah, I would not want that around. But I mean, it's around in eastern South Dakota. I know Brookings around here, we see it and that sort of thing. But small flower Galensoga is what I think it is.
Okay. And then there was a second part to this question, totally different topic. Can you tell me how to grow moonflowers? I Googled it. One site said to file the seeds because they're so hard. Another site said to soak them in warm water overnight. Sounds like what you hear with morning glories. They never came up. A friend said she planted some. They came up 3 years later. How can we get them to grow every year? I need the seeds for some neighbor girls because their last name is, or I gave some seeds to the neighbor girls. Their last name is Moon. They never came up. I think there's more than one kind of flower that's known as moonflower because there's Daturna, which is like a small plant, and then isn't there a climbing, well, small, like this big. And
actually, morning glories are also called moonflowers. I mean, so when you say...
Set us straight.
Yeah, well, you can't. And I mean, the nice thing I remember about moonflowers, the 1977 album by Carlos Santana, all right? Now, that was back in real music. But they're correct. The germination is sporadic. It does have a very hard seed coat. If they're talking about the vining one, and I think you're right, that's the important thing. If they're talking about a plant that'll vine out 12 feet in a single season, I mean, it's an annual in our thing, either nick the seeds, which are rather hard to do, or soak them for about 24 hours. But even there, the germination is fairly sporadic.
Okay. The other, am I correct that the other kind of moonflower is called Daturna?
Mm-hmm. Or Datura stramonium. Yeah. And that's actually kind of a weed, Datura.
Really?
And I was just sitting here trying to think of the name, the common name. You know, Datura stramonium is the Latin, but for some reason I'm having a blank on the common name. But anyway, that yeah, it's kind of a weed, and I see that around. You'll see the kind of the carcasses are very distinct. Sometimes, and that one, you know, speaking of edible weeds and that sort of thing, this is one that gets people into trouble a little bit. It has toxic side effects, if you can imagine that.
Oh my goodness!
This is one that sometimes kids will lick the seed or something like that, and it causes hallucinogenic effects.
Oh.
And so, which is okay, that's not so great, but of course too much and you die. So there's a fine line there. So certainly we would discourage
and you know that line because
yeah, well, this is what I hear and what I read.
Yeah, of course,
but a lot of times in the U.S., just about every year, people you know, dying from playing around with this stuff. So
okay, I think I've got that in my flower bed, and I'm worried about my pets.
I don't think it's it's not tasty at all.
Is it Jimson weed?
Jimson weed. There we go.
Yeah.
Jimson weed.
This is the night for questions, isn't it?
We're getting good ones.
We're on top of it.
Yeah, we're on top of it.
Okay, we'll go back to trees. Coming at you, a question from Aberdeen. A branch broke off during a windstorm on this maple tree. They sent in a picture for us. I'm guessing I should either cut the other 2 branches off or what? Where should I make the cut? The tree is about 15 feet or so tall.
Well, and this is one of those things that could have been corrected with a hand pruner many, many years ago, because we always want to try to get a tree to have a single stem up for at least the first 10 or 15 feet. When they start V'ing like you see here, that sooner or later is going to split, and as you can see from the picture, it's going to split again, a little below where it's currently split. So if it's an important tree to them, I would bite the bullet, and on the stem that has a split to it, I would cut that entire stem off.
So are you talking about the one that has the Y in the trunk, or no?
Right, just down at the bottom at Y's, and one of those Y's has that split to it where it tore. I'd take out that entire stem, so you'd have at least one stem going up for several feet, because eventually that's going to end up splitting again anyway. And I know when they do it, they'll say, my goodness, they have half a tree. But in 10 years' time, they'd be hard-pressed to tell that it had ever been done.
Really? So just get out.
Yep. And And oddly enough, that's something that they don't have to wait for winter to do. They could do it actually now.
Is there any, like, what, you just get out a hacksaw and go to it?
You know, a hacksaw would be a lot of work. Go out and get a pruning saw. Don't get your carpentry saws. Our carpentry saws are made to go through kiln-dried wood, not live wood. And get out there and cut it cleanly and closely. Do not paint it. But one of the things that I find interesting is last year there's been an awful lot more research which has pointed out to summer pruning is not as detrimental as we used to believe it was, and in fact, in many cases, is a better time to prune than winter.
Really? In what cases would it be superior?
Well, what it is the trees will actually wall off the wound that's created by that. It'll keep it from decaying. And that process is most active during the summer. Okay. During the winter, it's not occurring, of course, and they find it's delayed in the spring, and so there's a lot of research beginning to come out of Europe and then in the States that are showing summer pruning, while we used to say that was a no-no, is not. Now, before I say anything else, let me say that on elms, it absolutely is, because that will attract the beetle that carries Dutch elm disease. So we don't want to prune live wood off elms during the growing season, nor, especially for our Minnesota viewers, do we prune oaks in May and June, because that will also attract the insect that carries oak wilt. But for pruning like this on a maple, which doesn't have an insect that vectors in a problem, 10 years ago I'd have said, well, wait till winter to do that. Nowadays we say, you know what, you got a nice weekend, and you may go out and do it then.
Okay, so when the weather cools down, go to.
That could be winter.
Okay, we have a question from Pierre. Ground wasps are every place. What can you do about them?
Yeah, these I think are the same things or similar to what I had shown last week. They're in that same family anyway. These are actually a great insect to have around. All of them that we have here tend to hunt other insects, and many of them hunt insects that you want to get rid of anyway. A lot of the ones that you'd have out in Pierre are going to be hunting grasshoppers and crickets, and obviously we don't want those in the garden if we can help it. So the more of them you have in the yard, the better off you're going to be. The complaint about them really is that they dig up those little mounds of soil, and if you can just rake those out and disperse that soil a bit, I think that'll take care of a lot of it. These wasps are not likely to sting. You'd have to grab them and try to force them to sting you, and even then I doubt they would use any venom, because that venom is designed to paralyze insects. It's not designed to inflict pain. So if you can leave them alone, do it. Otherwise, to discourage them, keep watering those areas. They don't like to build nests in muddy areas.
Okay. I got to ask a quick question of my own. You're talking about beneficial critters in the garden, and I've got a nice sized toad that freaks me out when I go into the garden, and I'm putting Garden Guard on my cabbage. And is that bad for my little toad who's doing me favors and eating mosquitoes out there?
Well, it certainly doesn't help that toad any to have those things out there for a couple of reasons. First off, it's killing off its food, the insects that it would be eating. And secondly, those insecticides are usually not specific enough to just insects that they'll harm just insects. Difference is that if you have the right dose on there or the right amount on there, it's not likely to do any serious harm to the creatures that are larger than insects. But with any of those, we all tend to measure in gardens a little differently than some other settings, and you get a little too much of that out there, it could end up doing some damage to some of those other creatures.
Your little toad might grow an extra eye.
I'm not like any of the answers I'm hearing tonight. It's a cruel world.
I think the active ingredient is rotenone, correct? And it's fairly non-toxic to vertebrate animals. However, in fish, it'll kill fish or stun them, and that's if you have fish you want to keep around, or if you're near a stream, aquatic stream, I wouldn't be using that particular product because it is very toxic to fish.
Okay, I could be 100% wrong, but I thought in the movie The Creature from the Black Lagoon they used rotenone. And you're not gonna
I guess
check
he was
me on that?
Fish Man.
I'm serious, folks. I think so.
I'll watch that tonight.
Here's a question from Sioux Falls. If they bring a plant specimen to Brookings, where would they bring it to have extension folks look at it? How would he get there, and what's the cost to have somebody check it out?
How big's their visa? Well, you know, if they're looking to have something identified, I mean, right now, still the best, if they're in Minnehaha County, is take it down to the Minnehaha Extension Office. The folks there are very good at ID. If they can't ID it, they take a picture of it, and Mike gets it if it's weed. I get it if it's a tree or shrub. Dave or Rhoda gets it if it's a flower. I know John gets it on these as well. So, you know, before driving it up, I would just stop at the local extension office, or we have people that call the local extension and just email it to them. And they may already have the answer. If not, they just electronically send it to us, and we can get back to them.
Easier ways than having to actually come up and see you in person.
Right. I mean, it's one, we're always traveling the state, so it's not like we're sitting in our office. But the big thing is you got to take a very good picture, and we've seen that even on this show, that if they need a plant identified, make sure they're taking a picture of more than just a leaf. We need to know how those leaves are arranged on the plant. You need to get some idea of the size of the plant. Don't overload it, but 3 pictures, something showing the plant at a distance, something showing a branch or a twig or a segment of the plant. For example, it's a weed, and maybe a close-up of the leaf, so that we can look at 3 different parts of the plant, making sure all those are in focus. But you know, start with your local extension office and send it to them. If not, they'll pass it up to us.
Or if they are in Brookings anyways, there is the diagnostic lab right in kind of this, almost the center of campus, but in the plant science building or near the biostress building. But if you're on campus, ask around, where's the diagnostic lab? And they'll guide you there.
Okay.
If they want a residue test or something like that, then it needs to go to one of the other labs for testing. You know, every once in a while you get those samples that come in where they want to know if their plants were hit with an herbicide or something like that. And if that's the case, then it needs to go into one of those. And
but if it's just an ID,
if it's just an ID, start with your local office first.
Okay. Here's a question. I'm not sure where. From the southeastern part of the state. They feed the birds regularly, often have squirrels that visit their feeders. Last winter, they noticed a number of squirrels that had lost most of their fur prior to the coldest part of the winter. Eventually, these poor squirrels were nearly naked and in terrible condition. They're certain they froze to death. Did they have a disease? Is there anything that can be done to prevent it next winter? I know they're pests, but the manner of death was very brutal.
It sounds very much like they had mange. It's a condition passed on actually by a mite or small insect, and they lose their hair, and they're right. The animals lose the ability to thermoregulate and end up in cold weather just freezing to death, and can cause here in the last few years we've had kind of mange epidemics on coyotes in western part of South Dakota. I've seen some mangy squirrels here in Brookings, in the Brookings area. I haven't seen any at my place, but I've seen them on campus, missing part of the hair on a tail or having a bald spot here and there. And there's really nothing you can do, and it's generally it's a problem that kind of rears its head when population levels are high. There's a lot of squirrels, and they get passed around from individual to individual.
Right. So the mites cause an itching of the skin, and the animal actually ends up rubbing the hair off itself. It is a brutal way for an animal to suffer in the winter, but it's not the mites that are causing the hair loss. It's secondary. They're causing a reaction in the skin, much like a mosquito bite would be, and all over that body, and the animal is rubbing the hair off then.
So if there's nothing really that the person watching the animals can do, will this problem appear again next winter, or has the population probably crashed and the insects don't have enough to eat and the population will recover?
I mean, John would know better than I, but usually there's the kind of a reservoir in these wildlife populations. And it tends to be really cyclic. You'll get a time when there's a lot of squirrels and they're in close proximity, and the mites get passed from one squirrel to another. Maybe they're in a communal nest, these mites get passed around, and so it's kind of cyclic. It's out there in the environment. Usually doesn't rear its head, but sometimes it does.
These mites don't live out on their own either. They have to be on that host. And they can switch from one species to another to some extent anyway, but they're going to stay on an animal. It's not like they're going to be living out somewhere in the wild and jump on an animal that goes past.
So other than disposing of the carcasses, if you happen to run into them, that's
Well,
about it?
and once that animal is dead, even for a few hours,
there.
the mites are gone too. They'll die too fairly quickly, and especially in the winter. If that animal dies in cold weather, that cold weather will freeze the mites very quickly.
Okay. Well, we're running out of time, but I got to get a couple zucchini questions in real quick, because it's coming to be zucchini season. Question from Mitchell: my zucchini plants die at about this point in the growing season. I've harvested several squash. Then within like about 2 days, the whole plant is dead. This year, no exceptions. The yellow squashes, the plants are starting to wilt too. What can be done to prevent this?
I would start by looking at those stalks, especially close to the base of the plant. Cut them off of the plant and cut them open and see if they're hollowed out in the center, and you might even find caterpillars tunneling through the center of that. I think this is probably a squash vine borer problem, and if that's the case, get rid of that residue this year, burn that off, do some extra tillage in that area. Maybe go a year without planting any of the squashes there, but otherwise make sure you get some insecticide on starting about maybe the end of the first week of July, something like that, and put it right around the base of those plants to try to get rid of those moths as they come into lay eggs.
When I saw that question, I thought, yep, it's the end of July, beginning of August, because that is one of those questions that about this time of year we get every year.
What kind of insecticide can a person put down for that?
Generally what you see being used on that are some of those powders.
Okay.
Any of those powder type things are going to be fairly effective. You got to try to kill the adults.
Put down is the issue, because you're killing the adults to keep them from laying eggs so that you end up having it.
Okay, well, that's the final word. That's all the time we have for this evening. Just to let you know, Garden Line repeats twice each week on South Dakota Public Broadcasting's digital channel 3, also known as the Create channel. The encore broadcast can be seen Fridays at 11 a.m. Central and Saturdays at 4 p.m. Central. Check your local listings to find SDPB Digital Channel 3 where you live. And thanks to our panel of experts before we go tonight: John Kiekeffer, Brookings County Extension Educator; John Ball, Extension Forestry Specialist; Mike Mechnig, Extension Weed Specialist; and Casey Jensen, SDSU Natural Resource Management. Thanks to our phone volunteers, the Coteau Master Gardeners. Thanks to you for watching and calling in. On behalf of the entire crew, have a great evening and happy gardening.
Funding for Garden Line is provided in part by your membership in the Friends of South Dakota Public Broadcasting. And by Swiftel Communications.